Hey everybody, welcome to another Making a Geek. I am Damian DeCarlo. I am, as always, joined by some pretty awesome people. James Creviston, how are you, sir?
How's it going, man? Glad to be here. So happy to be here.
It's been like a long time since I've talked to you. Like, why? Why do you got to do that? You
I I think we're just all
jerk.
busy. I don't know. I don't know if it's anybody's dodging anyone.
It's called being an adult. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm also joined by none other than Kai Patterson. How are you, Kai?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Good,
Good.
good. This is yet again, we're back to geek out on our series of the Nolan films. We are on the next film, Memento. Plenty to talk about. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of there's just plenty to talk about. So I definitely enjoyed this watch through yet again. I have seen this film a few times, but we all have, I'm sure, very, very defined opinions about this. So we'll just get started right into it, and then at the end, we'll give our reviews. Whether at the end of the day, if it's worth your time, you the viewer, to watch Memento. So the first thing I'll ask our group of geeks here, with Memento being a film that came out, of course, by Christopher Nolan in the year 2000, is about a man with a short-term memory loss attempting to track down his wife's murderer. The question I have for you guys is, let's talk about some standout moments in Memento. What are some of the things that you guys took from this viewing? Let's
I
go with
mean,
you.
I
Let's
I
go with,
can
yeah, any of you guys.
sure I can start. And it just so happens that it is the literal first shot of the movie. And I've been reading this book called The Nolan Variations, and it's like a guy is interviewing Nolan, um, and kind of talking, asking him about all the different films he's done. And what he said about his first shots in any movie was pretty interesting to me. He's like, there's no attention grabber like the first shot of your movie. Like that is when the audience is honed in and they are ready to like watch something. And a lot of their experience relies on that first shot grabbing their attention or not. And what I thought was really interesting was that in the first shot, now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually like a metaphor for the way that Leonard thinks, because it is a Polaroid that is reversing. So you have all of the information right there at the beginning of the frame, and then it slowly starts to get foggier, 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 and then it's gone. And that's kind of like Leonard's condition of like he has all that information right in front of him, and then as time goes on, it's foggier, foggier, and then he doesn't have it anymore. So Nolan also likes to make the first shot of each movie like, kind of a taste of what the whole movie is going to be for you. And
Right.
so I thought this was perfectly executed for what you're going to watch and what Nolan wanted it to be. So honestly, that first shot stands out to me.
Absolutely. That for those that may not know, I should probably start doing this with the podcast. I assume that everyone tunes in, but we have a good panel here. James, you've done some screenwriting as well as I have. You've done more on the professional side. Kai, you're a filmmaker, so these opinions are coming from a very interesting perspective, especially with a Christopher Nolan type film because it's very in depth. Same with you, James. What would you say stood out? Any moments of this film to you, whether it be writing or whatever you picked up while watching it?
I I think the biggest thing for me that I pulled away from this film is how often people don't believe Leonard. How often they don't believe his problem, right? Like, I mean, this is 2000, right? We're now in 2023 where we are now talking about mental illness. We're now talking about mental health. We're now talking about things like this. If you wrote this movie today, it might be a little bit different than it was in 2000, right? Because you might be able to address it more. Characters might be more sympathetic, but I always the thing that stands out to me the most of this movie is people don't believe that he can't remember, right? And
Right.
today, I don't think that would happen. I think that's part of the film that in 2000 works in 2023 would not work now. But I love it because it gives you everything you need to make this film progress. Because if everyone believed Leonard's problem, if everyone believed that this is true, that he can't remember stuff, the film would be a whole different thing, right? Because
Right.
there's the characters have to believe he can't remember, right? I don't know how far we could jump ahead here. Spoilers if you haven't watched it. It's 2023. It's 20 something years. Go watch it. But when Carrie Ann Moss's character, she leaves and then goes in the car and slaps herself up and comes back, and he's trying to remember. And that moment she comes back in and he cannot remember what happened, and she tells him a whole brand new story. That right there, that's the scene for me that captures the whole thing. It's like everyone wants to not believe Leonard, but at the moment they realize they can use him because he can't remember, it changes how they relate with him, how they act around him, how they behave with him. And so that for me probably is the biggest scene that stands out the most for me, because you see it two different times. You see that scene two different ways. You see it the first way that Leonard sees it, which is her coming in frazzled, upset. We're like, what happened? He hit me. He did all these things or whatever. Who? And then like he's trying to figure it out, right? But then you see it again, the whole scene where they have a huge fight. She still acts like she doesn't believe him. She goes outside and she realizes, oh, he can't, he's watching me and he's trying to remember with all his heart. So she took all the pins, she took all the ways for him to remember anything, comes back in and does that to him. And you go, wow, this is how people treat people with mental illness. That's how you're going to treat somebody.
It really is sick. It really is.
It's gross.
I didn't really find myself in that same, I didn't have the same reaction when I first saw it. And I mean, I was younger for sure,
Right.
but I was also probably looking at other things at the moment. But I mean, ultimately, we now in 2023 are way more aware about mental health, and we know exactly, what those are being challenged with on a daily basis. So that's a very good point. I didn't think about how I felt back then to now regards to that. This movie, let's talk a little bit about the cast. So we have Guy Pearce, he's Leonard. We have Carrie Ann Moss, who's Natalie. Joe Pantoliano, he is Teddy. I would have focused on the three right there. Are there any standout moments that you guys want to talk about in regards to the cast? Was it a good cast, do you think? Do you have any standout moments in regards to the performances? I definitely have an opinion myself, but I want to ask you guys first. Let's go with you, Kai. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was a great cast. Honestly, like everybody is so believable in their role and in the world that Nolan created as well. I think Guy Pearce's approach to Leonard's character was like expertly done, because you really nothing about his performance to me suggests that like, oh, he isn't fully in Leonard's character. And I think honestly that's just a testament to Guy Pearce in general. Like every movie I've seen him in, there's really never been a time where I've been like, oh, that's Guy Pearce acting as somebody. I'm like, oh, that's that character.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Carrie Ann Moss, honestly, great choice too. What's wild is that like a lot of times I love her as a character, in a lot of the stuff she's doing, she's like so likable. And in this one, it's like she's got that charm, but she's also like awful. And she does it so well. But yeah, and honestly, yeah, I thought it was a great cast.
James, what do you think going into the performances? Anything stand out, or what do you have any input on regards to the acting?
Yeah, the Carrie Ann Moss is really the one that stands out to me because I always somehow forget she's in this movie until she shows up, right? And then you're like, oh, it's Trinity, right? Because that's what we're so used to. And then she's this terrible character, you're right? She's likable and unlikable at the same time, and you're like, how is this possible as an actor? And Guy Pearce, bravo to him. You literally believe that he has this amnesia. I believe it in every scene he's in. The way his eyes kind of glaze when he's trying to figure things out, you could tell he's actually trying to think about what they're asking him, even though he doesn't have it in his brain. On his face, you see it all, and you go, this guy's committed. Like either A, he really does have this, or B, this is the most committed actor you've ever seen in your entire life. And so when I see him do that, I go, this is amazing. I always also forget, because I've seen this movie a few times before we watched it again. I have always forgotten that it's a Christopher Nolan movie because to me it doesn't feel like the first Christopher Nolan movie I remember knowing Christopher Nolan for is all the Batman movies, right? So for
Right.
me, I was like, wait, what is this? And so, but then I see, oh, this is what he likes to do is look at the insanity in the world and how people treat other human beings in situations, even with Batman, right? Which I know we'll get to eventually. The whole thing is how do people treat Bruce Wayne? How do people treat Batman? How does Batman treat people? How does Bruce Wayne treat people? And there you see all of those interactions. He's a very human, like all of his stuff, even if it's a superhero, space, dreams, whatever. It's all about humanity and how humans interact with each other. I think a lot of times, especially since we watch like Marvel movies or like big over the top superhero stuff or Star Wars, even we lose the humanity and we get caught up in the story and the plot or even the special effects. And in this, it's so human and so raw that it's so good. I just love everyone acts so good, and two of the Matrix cast are in this movie, so I mean I can't get mad about that, you know.
So I will say that, and you guys tell me if you agree. In these actors that we are talking about, I feel that it hits different in 2023. I feel like that it's kind of more. I feel like that it means more to me now seeing them versus when it was back in 2000.
I feel like honestly, I feel like they did great. Like I feel like the performances, to me, nothing ever took me out of the story, which is usually how I always judge like a performance is does it take me out of the story? Does it seem unbelievable? And I think maybe what you might be seeing is probably like Nolan's early directing style. And because I believe as a director myself that the performance lives or dies with my directing choice. Yes, you can have bad actors who can't take direction, but he's working with very talented actors. And if it doesn't translate to talent on screen, it's because of the direction that the director gave.
Yeah.
But I think that since it was earlier on in his career, that might have been what you've been seeing.
This movie is very going into the directing portion. I think that is very sleight of hand with what is shown to us. It's very quick. We'll get to that when we review his other films more in depth. I think there's a lot of that he does, and this is the early taste of that in his career as far as showing us in his movies. But it's very much your own journey. These kind of movies. This isn't something that is. And correct me if you guys think differently, but I think that Christopher Nolan's films aren't ones that you are just supposed to obviously take for face value, but also you're not supposed to just have almost one unanimous opinion about, because it's kind of your own thing. You do pay attention, you piece it together, and at the end, I feel I relate to someone like him. Is that how do you guys feel about it? Like you tell me your own opinion. I'm not trying to give you just my opinion as a director. I want you to have your own conclusion. And that was very evident in one of the movies I can think of, The Dark Knight Rises, that has an ending where it was talked about, did it mean this? Did it mean that? I don't think that kind of film or any of his films are meant to have one particular way of ending. It's really just on you. What do you think of that, Kai, as far as that kind of storytelling? I know we have both you and I a good common ground regarding like we like that.
Yeah, I think honestly it's like any other art form, you know, art is so subjective um and I think that Nolan really understands that, and that's why like he has a specific vision for like what he believes the story like what the facts of the stories are that he makes. But I love that he's so open to like everybody else's individual experiences with his work too, to the point where like people will ask him what, you know, they're like, what did happen, what's the actual ending, like what is it like that you envisioned? And he's like, I do have that for myself, but it like shouldn't sway how you feel about the art that you consumed. And I really respect that. I think that that's awesome, as long as you do have like a vision yourself. Because I think if you don't, then that's when things get really wishy-washy, and then it's like, well, why did I even watch this if the person who made it doesn't have anything to say, you know? I think that's when it gets wishy-washy, but I don't think that Nolan does that.
Has this had a big influence on you with your filmmaking? Like this in particular, I know that there's elements that can inspire you with maybe Christopher Nolan, but this particular trying to have you come up with your own conclusion or your own narrative in the story.
I think that definitely, yeah, Nolan's way of doing things definitely has creeped up in a lot of the things that I do. Um, because I subscribe to that, you know, that thinking around art. And I think that it is really exciting. I don't know. I've just always had conversations with people where like, and it's always so fun when like an original piece that I've done is being like discussed or reviewed by people. I just love like hearing all the different ways that,
Right.
sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, and then this like really evoked this emotion in me. And I felt like the character was feeling this thing. And I'm like, honestly, I didn't see that when I was creating it, but that is awesome. And I love that, like, just coming from a slightly different perspective, as all humans do, like, can really change whether it resonates wholly with somebody or like someone's kind of repulsed by it. Like, it's just very interesting that art does that.
Right. Case in point, I think that this is something that has a point to what you're saying. I take an extreme film, and I say extreme in the sense of raw emotion. I'll go with a movie called Schindler's List. We know Schindler's List. It is a very powerful film, but to your point, there's going to be three different reactions, I would say, in this kind of film. One would be you're very emotional throughout it, almost a horrific experience, and you watch it, and that's what you take from it. Maybe a second one would be I found myself very bored. I don't like black and white films or history films. Or the third could be this meant a lot to me because this is something that directly correlates with my family heritage. So there's different takes on a very powerful movie, and powerful is subjective. It could be powerful in just it could be an animated film and it's still powerful, but it's the subject matter, what it means to you. So in this case, I would say, to your point, each film when made has a different meaning, and it should be that. I don't think that it should ever be cookie cutter. This is what it is, and I think that's all it's going to be for you. I don't believe in that. I feel going back to the old days, if we go to seeing Broadway performances, each meaningful act of this play means something different to you, and so they're I think that would be the way to go in filmmaking. Personally, that's just my personal opinion. But James, with you, is this something that you've ever crossed your mind with writing? Is this something that you like, or do you prefer having more, this is my vision, this is how I want to just have you take away with it?
Well, first of all, this is way too well written to be something I would ever do. This is fantastically layered. I am very much like comedic driven. So plot, as long as the plot is there, now it's time to stick gags in there. So I like to write like whatever the story is, and then let's add the humor to it. There are going to be plot points that are obviously going to be funny. The fun and games portion of a film is always meant to be fun. But you have to have a logical start point and a logical ending. For Christopher Nolan, especially for this film, there is no logical ending. You have no idea, did he kill the right person? Was this the right guy the whole time? What did he actually kill his wife? Or is he telling that story that he believes is another person? What? There's no logic there. It's all a frayed memory of a man who can't remember anything. And that right there is the genius of the whole thing. This is way beyond my ability to ever do, way beyond my ability to ever create. But I'm glad that there are people like Christopher Nolan that can create this, and then can also go and create some of the greatest Batman films we've ever had in our entire lives. I'm a great big Batman fan, and to see a man who created Memento, which honestly looks like the grittiest film you would probably have ever seen, but is still beautiful at the same time. I don't know how he did that. And then goes and makes one of the darkest films with one of the greatest characters we've ever seen, we've ever known in the history of comic books, but make it fresh and raw and feel new, but also feel true to the comic book legacy at the same time. That man's a genius. Christopher Nolan is literally a genius. And if I could even do 1% of what he's done in my career, I'd be happy. I'd be happy with that.
And
you
it's
know?
it's really an art form, like we were talking
It-
about. Like
it
if
is.
you make drama movies, it's an art. If you make action films, it's an art. I think also paying tribute to you, James. I mean, you being a comedian, comedy is an art, and maybe Christopher
It's,
Nolan couldn't make a comedy.
oh,
Maybe
I
he
would love to
couldn't
see a
to the
Christopher Nolan
degree that
comedy.
you can. So there's
Well,
art
comedy
for everything.
always tends to be way more subjective than any other form of art. Like comedy
Right.
is one of those things that people either really love or really hate. I know people will watch the same comedic moment and they'll go, "That was stupid," right? They'll just be like, "That's stupid," and
Right.
I will be crying, laughing, like this is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life, because comedy is probably the most divisive medium in arts. Comedy,
Right.
for some reason, strikes a chord with people. I like one of my favorite films, Billy Madison. People are like, that's a stupid Adam Sandler movie. There is so many layers to that film that if you pay attention, that are there, that exist in that movie, that I love it. It's so
Yeah.
fun. But people are just like, oh, it's about a stupid guy who's rich and goes back to school and is an idiot. You're like, okay,
Right. Well,
great.
they
Okay.
take probably those kind of films with face value that might be a certain kind of crowd, and
Right.
I'll get into that with this film. Now, I think face value with Christopher Nolan's movies could be, this is very hard to keep up with. It jumps around a lot. It's not linear. It's very like just confusing. Those are the things I have heard, but
Yep.
also on the reverse side of it, then I've heard this is genius. This is great the way it jumps back and forth. I can piece it together. You ultimately have to work for this kind of movie. Like it's sort of homework live on screen. You have to think a little bit, and not to say that someone that wouldn't means that they're by any means dumb or anything. It's just maybe they don't find that entertaining. Maybe they don't feel like doing that after a long day of work. It's like, oh Jesus, I have to like piece things together. I just pieced a whole $1 million deal at work today. I don't want to do that. So it just really depends on the crowd, and I think there's something for everyone. In this movie, and a lot like Christopher Nolan's films, there's not much use of CGI special effects. What do you guys think? I'll start with you, Kai. In this film, in particular, a lack of CGI special effects. What I want to know your geeky but also professional opinion on that.
Honestly, to me, it just screams low budget, and that's pretty much it. Like when I'm thinking about, what kind of a film I would want to make for my feature, and like imagining the easiest way to do it, I would be like, I can't have it have crazy visual effects, because that's just like a money suck.
Right.
And I think that it can also like take away from the story you're trying to tell if you don't know how to use that tool yet. So I can see like from a young director's perspective being like, if I really want to like focus on my craft, I want to focus on telling a story that is simple, but still riveting and exciting to watch,
Right.
and not rely on any kind of like spectacle. So that's what I think he was probably exploring in his earlier years. But obviously, from the films we've seen now, like he loves special effects, he loves visual effects, he loves like making things larger than life. But I think that that's almost something you have to earn to really use it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Going into now the motion picture soundtrack that was composed. It was composed by David Julian. What were some of your thoughts on the movie score? And this is going to be a quick little talk about the film's music. Did the score stand out in this film, or did it make a difference at all in your viewing? James, let's go with you first.
I'd probably have to say it was really subdued enough that I didn't even notice it. I think there's a lot of movies where you notice the score. Like you go watch Harry Potter or Batman, right? You go watch you need that music. You need that duh, duh, like you need that stuff. This movie doesn't need that. It needs something because you need an ambient noise besides talking. Otherwise, it feels weird.
Right.
As we've all learned, if we've ever watched The Quiet Place, it's the weirdest movie to watch until stuff happens. But in a movie, there's for some reason we need a soundtrack, even if it's subdued and light and the tone doesn't. I really can't even, I couldn't tell you what a song in this movie sounded like because it
Right.
was perfect for just ambient to the piece of it. It probably was frantic enough where it was noticeable because we're probably wanting to feel the way that Leonard's feeling. So it
Right.
probably was written in a way that way, but it wasn't overwhelming where it took you out of the movie. It's not like, Guardians of the Galaxy where every 5 minutes there's a new song and it's meant to do something with a scene and blow you away. It's not the same kind of movie. So, and that was the thing with special effects too. There's no need for it because it's not that kind of movie. It's a subdued, driving film about a man trying to solve a murder and figure out what's going on with his own mind. And
Right.
you don't need a lot for that. So
you think that it wasn't really needed anything major? Kai, what do you think? What do you think about the score in general? And did it need more? Did it need less?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you, James, too. Like, I'm like trying to rack my brain thinking about what on earth was the music in this, and I can't think of a single like melody or anything
Right.
that is associated with this film. So, but I also think, to James's point too, I feel like there's a couple of different experiences that you can have with a movie score. Either you're listening to it and you're going, this is taking me out, this is out of place,
Right.
or you're like, this is enhancing my experience so much, like this really, like, take like Indiana Jones's theme song out of the movie and it's a totally different movie. But
Absolutely.
then I also think that there is the same spot where it's like, maybe I didn't notice it, but it's also maybe just like a really good visual effects shot. If it's done really well,
Right.
it just goes by and it's part of the experience, and it doesn't like take you out, but it also doesn't it doesn't call attention to itself. It just
Exactly.
is
Right.
there. And I think maybe that's where this is. I think at first when you asked the question, I was kind of thinking maybe it's not a good score because I can't remember it. But also I'm like, well, but maybe it was exactly the score it needed to be because
Right.
I didn't feel like it needed a score, you know?
Yeah.
right.
I got you. I will say I'm going to name another one of my directors yet again for a second time in this podcast, but one of the most intense films I've ever seen. I'm thinking Saving Private Ryan by Steven Spielberg.
Mm.
No score in that. There's about 6-7 different song cues by John Williams, and that's it. There is nothing in that film with a score. Did that need it? No, it did not. In fact, it was very evident that there was no music, and that's because of the type of raw feel of what you were put into. It was already intense. You didn't need to enhance it. But I think in this movie, and I'll differ from both of your opinions. I think it did need something. Personally, looking back, and I'll give you an example. Kai, you and I reviewed the last film with him. Following that film had a very, if you recall, it had like that little tea kettle sound with the little
Mm-hmm.
tapping and the tapping and the tapping. It felt on the verge of anxiety ridden, slightly stressful.
Yeah.
I kind of feel this film would have done well with that again, but I understand Christopher Nolan's feeling of you're trying to piece it together from Leonard's point of view, not from an audience point of view, trying to see a presentation. So I think that if you're in Leonard's shoes, there really isn't much of a musical score. It's very confusing what he's going through. So I'm divided in that, but I will be more on the side of I think it needed more of that kind of a musical score. But that's just me. So I'm no
Okay.
expert. Continuing with the review, I pose a very interesting question for you guys in regards to this film. Beyond just the entertainment factor of this movie, what value or understanding does Memento offer in regards to our world today, the current human condition? Is there anything that you guys can take from that to be able to apply?
I really, the one, go ahead, Kai. No, you want to
No,
go?
please.
I was gonna say the one thing I love about this movie is it really makes me think about how I interact with people and in what state they are at the time, right? Because you could run into the same person 3 times in a day, and they may be in 3 different mindsets and 3 different modes, right? Or however many times you run into them, they may be in a whole different mindset. They may at one point be very calm in the morning and kind. Then something happened in their day, and now they're frantic in the afternoon. And by the end of the day, they are stressed out, worn out, and feel like the world has just stomped all over them, right? And those are 3 different people, right? They're the same person, but mentally they're 3 different people, and so you don't know who you're up against, not up against, but you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I've this movie has really made me realize we need to be more thoughtful about how when we engage with people, what their mental state is at the same time what our mental state is, because we also may be experiencing the same thing and we may not be able to understand it, right? Leonard can't always associate that. He knows that he has this issue, but also at the same time, it frustrates him just as much as it's frustrating everybody else. And
Right.
so it amps him up at certain levels. Sometimes he's okay with it. Hey, I have this issue. This is what I'm dealing with, whatever. I'm calm. But then if it's like everything's overwhelming him and he knows he has an issue, now he's at a 10 and it's like a whole different Leonard that you're dealing with,
Right.
as they find out. But I think that's the big point that I took away from it is, your mental state affects who you are as a person, and it affects your interaction with other people. And if we can take a moment and step back and try to see the world through different people's perspective and the moment that they're in that mental state, we can do a lot of good in the world. These people saw this mental state of this person and took advantage, right? And used him to further means. The one scene that stands out to me the most is when she brings the beer and has everybody spit in the thing and then gives him the beer. That moment to me is like, seems like honestly the meanest moment of the film. Like, I know that that's probably not really considered mean to a lot of people. For me, that's like, you're taking a person who has a clear issue, a clear mental state that's not the normal or the standard of what we define as normal, and you're abusing them. And to me, that's this one scene of the film I hate the most. Actually, I don't know why. That's it. It seems like it probably shouldn't be because it's not a really huge slight, but it is. So that's what I take away from this film. That's why I like this movie. It really makes you step back and try to see life through another person's perspective, which this movie is all about. You seeing life through Leonard's perspective, making you feel frazzled and uninformed and unable to piece things together. Again, you don't want to do homework while you're watching a movie, but this is a movie that I really like watching, even though it does make you do a little bit of homework.
Wow, that is an amazing follow-up to my question. Kai, good luck with that following up here.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kai.
No, yeah, that's perfect. That's
Tell
why
me
I
a little
wanted
bit
to
about
go
your
first,
side
so
of
I
it,
can
Kai.
just
I wanna
like
know.
copy it and change it a
Copy
little
and
bit.
paste.
So I'm like, actually, no, something I wrote down when I was watching was the quote, "You're not even going to remember it." And I thought that maybe that was Nolan's message to like almost the audience about like his own movies or his own career, like and I said his films are just a dream and reality. The world doesn't stop when you close your eyes. The things that we do mean something, even if no one sees or remembers. And so I think that that's something that like the film evoked in me, because like from Leonard's perspective, the thing that he doesn't have that we have the privilege of audience members is that he can't piece things together because he has short-term memory. We experience his short-term memory because it's told in a non-linear way, but we have the privilege of piecing it together and having some kind of outside opinion of the situation. And I think that maybe Nolan is calling attention to that fact of like your own life and your own experiences. Like when I am interacting with you two on this, this is the little interaction that we get in this life, just these 30 minutes or whatever. And then your life is different and my life is different. I could be a terrible, horrible human being to somebody else and you'd never know, like that kind of stuff, where it's like these are things you reflect on and you're like, okay, but if I was seeing my life, maybe like an audience member was watching my life and could see everything that I was doing and could piece all the things together about who I was as a person, how would I want them to view me? And like, how is that going to inform the way that I act just to everybody in my life?
Right.
Do I want to be the hero or the villain of my story? And I think what I kind of came away with, is that we do have the ability to kind of step back and take the context of all of our actions throughout all the things we've done in our life, and we can decide, what do I want to do differently? And unfortunately, Leonard didn't really have that privilege.
Yeah.
I feel like just like a bobblehead right now. Just yep. Everything you're saying, yeah, totally true.
Just remember, Kai, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
I can't wait to do the Dark Knight trilogy with you, man.
I know.
Man.
That is the whole reason why I started this. I swear. I'm the biggest Batman nut.
I love it, dude. I'm so excited for that. Those are my favorite. My wife is like they terrify her. She's like, this is too dark, and I'm like, this is Batman.
Real.
This is what it's Batman, man.
Yeah, totally get it. Yeah. So going on next then, as we are close to wrapping up, a couple more questions I have for you guys. What would you like to have seen different in this film, or what would you have wanted to maybe add or change that you could give an opinion on to help future films they can maybe possibly learn from this kind of opinion? James.
Well, I only want a definitive ending, but that's just like the storyteller in me. That's not against Nolan. That's not against this film. That's not against anything he's done. Yeah, it's just my preference. That is it. Otherwise, this is one of those films that makes you go either, oh, I want to be a filmmaker, or I'll never be a good filmmaker. Like, that's literally the way I walked away from it. Is like, I saw Clerks and went, yeah, I could do that. Right. I saw Pulp Fiction and went, man, that's pretty awesome. I would love to do something like that one day. I see this and I go, I'll never do that. Like, that's literally the evolution of how that is. No offense to any of those.
Shoot yourself down immediately. That's not going to happen. No.
Yeah. Because you watch Pulp Fiction, you're like, this is attainable, right? Still, it's not a linear story. There are skips, there are cuts, whatever, but it's attainable. You watch this and you go, what did I just watch? Someone is either there's a genius made of film. You watch Kevin Smith. No offense, Kevin Smith. I love Kevin Smith. Some of his movies are my favorite movies.
The guy's genius.
I can do that. Come on. He's a genius, but I could do that. Like, I can go and make Clerks, right? And so that's the weird thing of it. It was like three of some of the best directors ever, and you go, I can do it. I would love to do that. I could never do that. And so I think that's my only thing with it. I wouldn't change, except for I would like to know the definitive ending. If I ever got Christopher Nolan in the room, I would say, please tell me, did Leonard actually kill his wife, or is it just storytelling? Was Teddy the actual person who killed, or did he just been tricking them this whole time? And what happens? What happens to Leonard afterwards?
If he was there, I would think, and the point of this podcast, he would say to you, what do you think happened?
Oh yeah,
I would just grab him like, I don't care. You tell me what you're supposed to be. Like,
tell me now. He would. What if he's just like, I don't know. I really don't know.
You just see me on the news like, this man was shaking Christopher Nolan. What is the ending?
Christopher Nolan just and then you're arrested. Kai.
Yeah, of course.
Let's go to you, sir. Same question.
What would I change? What would I change about any element of this? I think, honestly, and this is something I'm sure a lot of people would agree with, is that like Nolan is usually very like a cold filmmaker. He's logic based,
right?
Which is, I think, it is great, and definitely like a younger me was like all into that, and I was just like, when I didn't have the weight of the world on my shoulders and I was still just like, wow, the world is so crazy. Like a logic-based world was like, that's great. Give me that. But I think as I get older and things hit me with more emotion, I think like this movie has some of the most insane emotional stakes that you could have for a character who's trying to like find the killer and assaulter of his wife, and like is doomed to repeat that fate for the rest of his life. Like, those emotional stakes are there, but I don't think that Nolan played the emotional piano like he could have. So that's my only thing. I think he really could have pulled out more emotion in the storytelling than he did initially. And I think this was pre-Nolan having kids, so I think he's leaned more into emotion as he's kind of developed his relationship with family, and how that's important to him. So I think this is just early Nolan with a little bit more logic based, with like the potential for a lot of emotion, but stayed
Right.
squarely in logic.
You know what they say about story writers and directors when they are doing great, I've heard before, just get more life experience and you'll get better. So in his case,
Mhm.
having a family, that changes things. You change. I'm not speaking from experience. I don't have children, but excuse me, those that I do know, it does radically shake your world, and not in a bad way. It's just like
Mhm.
there's a different side of me I have to bring out here. So I'm sure that comes across in your filmmaking and your storytelling. So I mean,
Mhm.
even in James's sense, his comedy, every day is going to be
Yeah.
something even funnier because he has kids.
Yeah, that's
So
true. Well, the only thing that I would say to that is I like the logic based telling of Nolan, because think about it this way: if Nolan had done Superman instead of Batman, they wouldn't have the same feel, right? A Superman has to be a more human
Mhm.
character, whereas Batman was very logical, very straightforward, very rigid in what he does. Those two things are not gonna. There would not be a good Christopher Nolan Superman movie. No offense to Nolan, I'm sure it would be beautiful, but it wouldn't work the same way. Batman works for him because that's the mentality that he has, and you can see those two people being the same kind of person. Not saying Christopher Nolan dresses up as Batman and goes and beats up people. I'm saying like Batman is a very logic based character,
Mhm.
and all the characters that he has are very logic based characters, or trying to be logical in their approach to whatever their situation is. So I love that he does that. I do agree. How would you make that more human though, or more humane, or raise the stakes emotionally? Because Leonard can't have emotion in this moment. He can't be emotional in this hunt for his wife's murder. He can't be. He has to be logical because he can't remember anything. If he gets emotional, he loses more than he gains.
right.
So I think that might be the only reason there's not a lot of like emotional moments in that film.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
think I think you're right on that. It couldn't have been Leonard's character for sure, because he
Yeah.
has to be kind of the rock in this. But I think the characters around him, had they had more empathy for his situation,
Yeah.
even if it's one character that's not able to help him in that situation, because everybody else is taking advantage of him, but
Yep.
just adding in one character that like really empathizes with him, uh I think could definitely be a more emotional core to the movie. But I agree. I mean, I still thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I
Oh yeah.
think that like what was in it was great. And the logic, I think the logic based filmmaking helps in a sense that like when you're watching a film that's more logic based, you start turning on your critical thinking, and you're like,
Right.
okay, I got to pay attention. I got to be like looking around for plot details and stuff. And
You're
like
gonna
a
get
more
left behind if you
emotional
don't.
movie,
Yeah.
yeah, a more emotional movie, you're kind of along for the ride to just kind of like feel, and you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to like keep up. You just like, go through this journey. So I get what you're saying too. Yeah.
I could see a great point at being added to this film. Like he has like a child that is empathetic for him, because I think a child would be
Mhm.
the only character that would show Leonard empathy in this kind of movie, and it
Interesting.
would have to be like a little girl. I think would be like the perfect
Mhm.
character if you were going to introduce a character to show empathy and kindness and how to deal with a person who maybe isn't their full self, because everyone else, the adults, are going to take advantage, because that's the kind
Mhm.
of, sadly, that's the world we live in. That is probably a logical way that they would approach him. But a child would be kind and understanding, and say, how can I help you, Leonard? How are you feeling today, Leonard? Those kind of things to him. So I think that would be great. But then it also would take away from the story. Like
Yeah, it
it
would
would, it
totally
would, it would
change the
Yeah.
totally,
story.
yeah, it would totally change it. But I like that idea, man. Now I want to see the Kai Patterson cut of Memento with a child added in.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I'm gonna say that I'm still sticking to my story. The only thing that I would have changed is just the musical score. That is literally it. The cast was perfect. The flow was perfect. I love that the segments that were him going back in black and white were great. It was just, you had a great intro with the Polaroid. I mean, everything was, chef's kiss, beautiful. I couldn't have done it better, but I would have definitely changed the score. And I'm sticking to that story. I'm gonna take that to the grave.
Would you go like full James Gunn with it, like throwing in more musical stuff. Like when I think of scores, the funny thing is I think of James Gunn movies and shows, because he puts this pop culture punch
He
into
does,
everything
yeah.
that we are used to, right? If you play like Grand Theft Auto or other games and there's music in the
Yeah.
background, you're so used to setting the tone based on that. Is that what you do, or are you thinking more like Jurassic Park or Harry Potter? We need to amp up that composer-esque type background music. Like, which would you go for?
Like I was saying before, the last film, following, that's what it's called, that he did.
Right.
That if you listen to that musical score, I would say that it would fit this film as well. It sounded like a lot of percussion, like a lot of tapping, like a lot of like just very
Right.
stress inducing kind of a score. There wasn't really melody. It wasn't like Harry Potter, Jurassic Park. I don't think this movie calls for that. I think this needs. I wanted to feel a little stress factor, just a little
Okay.
bit, but I think in it of itself, that was the stress that he couldn't remember, and you're following that too, in the sense that like I don't know what's happening, just like he does. There's a sense though, I feel there's too much in being the first person view. I think that you needed to take it back a bit and be a little theatrical, and I think that musical score would have added that little touch of theatricality to say, hey, you're not completely in this guy's shoes. Check it out, like get hyped up, get amped. But that would be the only thing. I think everything else was great, and I think that the cast was perfect, like I've said. I'm glad that we talked about the cast. So perfect segue into the next question, and this will be one of the last ones. How well, after 23 years now, how well does Memento hold up, like in terms of today's standards of film, awareness, all these factors that have to be weighed in now? James, we'll start with you. How do you think this holds up now after 23 years?
I think the film is fantastic, but I think the way that if Christopher Nolan made this movie today, I don't know if he could do the relationship to characters and Leonard's mental health the same way. I think we're more understanding and kinder than we were 20 years ago. Heck, even 5 years ago or a few years ago. We are now more understanding of people's mental health issues. I remember growing up in like the 80s and 90s, like you would just avoid people with any kind of mental health issues just because people were
Yeah,
like, well, they're crazy or they're whatever. And then just kind of, they are the dregs of society. They're cast off.
absolutely.
They're
Yeah,
not someone you interact with. Now we understand there are a litany of issues that lead somebody this way. And in a moment of compassion, a moment of you trying to understand and empathize can change a lot of things. So I think that might be the only thing that would be different. I don't know how he would approach that, but there still are people who take advantage of mentally ill people or people with mental disabilities all the time. We see it all the time. You watch the news, you can see it. Someone collecting their grandma's social security check and she's starving in a bed and they've taken her mental disability check or whatever,
right.
all these other things. People do mistreat people like that, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think there might be another character now added to this movie to show the other side of humanity in that moment too. And again, I would argue that would probably be a child, because I think they're the only ones who are pure enough in the world to be able to see someone in that state and have true empathy, true compassion for them. Whereas we want to believe we would, but I think we still, at least me, I know I'm being honest for myself. If I'm in downtown LA and there's a man ranting and raving down the street who I know has mental illness, I'm just going to avoid him. I'm not going to stop and help him or try to take him out. But so I think that the children are the ones among us that would be the one to help Leonard in these moments and actually show the compassion and kindness. But besides that, I think it's a fantastic film.
Wow, really good answer. Kai, good luck with that. Now following up again.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kai. Sorry,
Same
Kai.
question goes to you, Kai.
It was actually interesting when you were talking, James. You made me think of the fact that, like, you know, even a few years ago, when Iron Man 3 came out, it was like crazy to see a superhero have a panic attack on screen.
Yeah,
Like that was a huge discussion point for a lot of people. They were like, "Oh my gosh,
absolutely.
like Iron Man has a mental, challenge."
Yeah.
And this kind of movie, I feel like, uh, unfortunately, if it was made now, I think with the way audiences are, I don't think it could have had a theatrical release,
Oh,
or if it did, I don't think it would do super well in the box office. I think where it would probably thrive would be maybe like a Hulu miniseries or something. I think it would end up being like a really like people would be talking about it because it was some kind of series on TV, but I don't know if it would have been able to do a theatrical run like it did. Which is kind of sad to me because like I think it's a great movie. I just think audiences like, I mean, big budget movies that are action flop these days anyways. So like I don't think any studio would be like, "Oh, sure, we'd love to run this movie theatrically."
There's no
you
room for
know?
that. There's room for Fast and the Furious 27.
Yeah,
Way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Dwayne
but
the
I
Rock
think that
Johnson's in a walker still, like doing stuff. We're coming for you.
Yeah. We need money, people, not quality.
Yeah.
That's sad that I'm
But
saying.
I think that it does like hold up still, like I think that the themes are still relevant. And I think that one of the things that I really, really respect Nolan for is like at this time when he was making this movie, the only mentally ill characters really were villains or, people that were considered, scary or bad to the story. And I think that Nolan did a great job of like humanizing people with mental challenges and mental disabilities
Right.
that like could start a conversation on like, oh, didn't you have empathy for Leonard in that scene where they all spit in his cup? Like, doesn't like you could feel how Leonard would feel,
Right.
and I think that that is one of those moments where you're able to have a discussion on the ethics of putting people in those situations
Absolutely.
instead of like saying, oh, they're mentally ill so they're scary, they're the villain of the plot.
Yep.
Absolutely. That one scene that James just probably covered his eyes, just like I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I
It just
get it. I get it.
frustrates me. Yeah, no, it's just
Yeah,
like one of those
it's
things where
horrifying
like
to see those things. It's horrifying, and to see people taken advantage of. That's I have a problem with that in real life and in film.
yeah.
Sometimes I just can't do it. So I can
Mhm.
relate to that. So to wrap it up, let's talk at the end our ratings, and the way we do that is we just have a nice little numbered system to show what we thought of it. But I want to know your guys' score and why you gave it that number. So Memento, year 2000, Christopher Nolan. Let's hear the first number and review. Kai, let's start with you.
I would give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. I think for me, because again, like I said, I think the emotional stakes could have been played with a little bit more. And I also personally reserve 10 out of 10 films for like rewatches. Like I will rewatch it anytime, any day. Like I will have so much fun on this rewatch. And I think Memento, I need a few years in between each rewatch.
Right.
But that's the only reason why I think I reserve those 10 out of 10s for like I really could watch it anytime. Like Jurassic Park is one of those where I'm like, you put that on. If I see it on TV, I stop what I do. I'm watching
Yep.
that.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
That's the 10 out of 10.
James,
Yeah.
how about you?
Most of my 10 out of 10s are comedy movies. So like Office Space. Like if that's on,
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch the movie.
Yeah.
I agree. It's probably about an 8. I don't like using half stars, and that's no offense to Kai at all. But an 8. Like it's an 8. It's a solid 8 movie where you're like, this is a great film. Should people watch it? Yes. If anyone's like, hey, do you have a recommended like a film I've never seen that should watch? Yeah, watch Memento. It's gonna freak you out. You're gonna have a lot of questions, but you're gonna also enjoy a story that is unlike any story you've ever watched before. And I think you should watch it. So it's an 8 for me. Again, there's not much I could change about this movie because the way it's designed is to make you feel the way Leonard feels. And I don't know of a movie that's ever done that to me where I felt as confused as the main character, right? I've never felt that way before. So I really enjoy it. Again, if it had the ending, like if he told me all that wrapped it all up in a tiny little bow for me, because that's what I want,
Yeah.
probably be a 9, or a Kai's 8.5, I guess. And then we get there. But other than that, it's fantastic. So yeah, great.
So
8.
I'm not piggybacking on you guys, I swear, but I had a number in my head that is also an 8. I definitely have a defined 8 for this.
Yeah.
I think that it goes with the musical score thing I said too, but I think this movie lacked a bit of emotion for me It lacked a bit of. I feel like the film, while it was interesting, it was very relaxed. Like there wasn't
Oh.
parts for me that were like, oh, I'm so intense right now. This is so edge of my seat. There might have been portions where I thought this is cool, but it wasn't like, that's what I guess I meant by emotion driven with the music. Maybe the music would have carried the same scenes slightly a little more, hurried along where it's, a bit more stressful. But I felt like it was sort of a relaxed for me plot where I'm kind of like sitting back, I'm piecing it together. I don't feel like it's just something I was, let's just say, like the way I first saw, I'll go back to the Batman films, The Dark Knight. When we see that, it's intense from me to the beginning to end. So it's not that the movie had the most intense sequences. It was just that it was intense storytelling for me. It moved along in a way that like I really liked. So that's why I give it an 8. I think that Christopher Nolan was just getting started. He had plenty to do still in his mind and his world, but he needed to be, he needed to have some Hollywood exposure, and this was it. Because prior to that, we had Following, which obviously was extremely low budget, no major movie studio attached to it. But this is like your one go, and I think that studios execs really got it. Like they're like, okay, we get you, we get like what you have in store. We'll file you away for when we have another story come in that you would be best to tell. And I think that's exactly what happened with the next film, as far as I remember. So definitely want to hear your guys' opinion. Do appreciate all the comments and the follows on our social media. We have more to cover in the Christopher Nolan films and may not be linear in these episodes as they come out. It's not to be like Christopher Nolan, but we have other interviews we possibly do. But the goal is to go through each film and review it, and I think that is awesome coming from two very, very awesome guys. So my two very awesome guys, where can folks find you on social media? James, let's start with you.
At the Clean Comedy Podcast. That's all my stuff is on there. So that's it. But I'm only on Instagram, but then it connects to my website and all my other stuff. So you're good.
Kai.
Yeah, if I'm on the social media platform, then it's Kai Patterson Films. Unless it's Twitter, then it's Kai Patterson Cut, because films wouldn't fit on the handle. But KaiPattersonFilms.com, you can also find all of my social media as well.
Awesome. You can find me at Damien_DeCarlo, collectively at makingitgeek.com. Until next time, everybody, you be sure to stay calm and geek on. Geek. Good night, everybody.